My name is Mary Bloomington, and I never thought the two people I trusted most would be the ones to bury a sharp rock in my back, quietly, for a year. My husband and my best friend thought I didn't know, but I did. And while they were busy sneaking around, I was busy making sure everything, the house, the assets, the business, ended up in my name. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about power, silence, and knowing exactly when to strike. Tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because you're not going to forget this one. The valet opened the door, and I stepped out in heels that hurt too much for someone who'd just walked out of a marriage. The Texas heat clung to my skin, even at night, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't here to feel comfortable. I was here to make sure they saw me. The country club's annual black tie fundraiser was always his moment, his turf, his crowd. And there he was, by the bar, holding a drink in one hand and her laugh in the other. Dan looked thinner. Or maybe that was just my new clarity. Sabrina leaned into him, her hand on his chest like it belonged there, like it hadn't once shaken while she zipped me into my wedding gown. I walked past them without stopping. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Just raised my champagne like a curtain rising on the final act of a very quiet war. They didn't notice me at first. But when they did... when they did. Sabrina's eyes widened first, like she'd seen a ghost she never buried properly. Dan turned halfway, and for a second, he smiled, before realizing that smile no longer worked on me. It collapsed on his face like a failed deal. "Mary?" he muttered. Not like a husband surprised to see his wife. More like a man who just realized he left the safe open. I didn't answer. Just stared. Like I was memorizing the moment he lost everything and didn't know it yet. Because tonight wasn't about catching them. It was about showing them what I did while they thought I was asleep. But before we go there, before I tell you about the lawyer in the corner office, the bank account passwords, the documents I had rewritten while she was sitting across from me at brunch pretending to care, let me rewind. Let me tell you what happened the night I first knew. Because it wasn't a scream or a lipstick stain. It wasn't a phone call. It was a silence, one so loud it cracked the glass between what I believed and what was real. It was late. Dan was working late again, and I was folding laundry with a glass of wine in hand, watching old home videos. The kind that make you feel safe in a house that's already burning. I had just clicked on one from our last anniversary trip, Mexico. Sabrina had planned it all. She said I needed to relax and reconnect. Funny. It's easy to offer reconnection advice when you're the one tying the knots behind the scenes. The video played. Dan was holding the camera, laughing at something. I was off screen, complaining about sunscreen in my eye. And then, there it was. His voice dipped, not to talk to me, but to someone sitting beside him. "You like that dress on her?" he asked. A soft giggle. Hers. "You picked it," she replied, just off camera. My wine glass didn't fall, but something inside me did. I paused the video, rewound it, played it again. His laugh, her voice, his tone, and the way she said it, like it was an inside joke I was never meant to hear. I sat there frozen, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. It made sense now, the overly sweet texts, the sudden distance, the way she started showing up more and listening less. It was like watching puzzle pieces slide into place, only they didn't build a picture. They built a crack. For a moment, I thought of confronting them. But what would that do? Make them cry? Apologize? They'd just go underground. No. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd go silent. And silence, I've learned, is the sharpest knife in the drawer. The next day, I hired a private investigator, just to be sure. Because a woman can't move the pieces unless she knows where the board ends. By week 3, I had folders, photos, locations, dates, a hotel receipt with Dan's signature and her initials scribbled in the margin. Sabrina's Instagram stories suddenly made more sense. Cropped photos, same curtains, different captions. I didn't cry, didn't scream, I documented. I called a friend from law school, now a partner at a boutique firm downtown. Told her I was thinking about restructuring assets in case of divorce. She didn't ask questions, just gave me names and a timeline. Every Thursday, while Dan thought I was at yoga, I met with a financial advisor. We talked trusts, property ownership transfers, revisions to the will, frozen lines of credit, silent account migrations. It felt cold at first, until I realized it was the only warm thing I'd done for myself in years. Sabrina still came around, still smiled with my kids, still brought wine over and called me her sister. I let her, because you can't steal what I'm giving away willingly. Dan was too arrogant to notice the details changing, the titles shifting, the way our house was now in my name, the vacation home too, the stocks, the yacht, the business shares, legally frozen. He thought love made me blind. He forgot. Contracts don't love. They protect. I let them keep playing, let them believe they were winning. But the real twist? It came the day Sabrina showed up crying. On my doorstep, mascara down her cheek, voice shaking, telling me she had to tell me something. And that's where I'll take you next. To the moment my best friend stood in my foyer with a lie in her mouth and a question in her eyes. To the moment I didn't flinch, because I already knew everything, but I didn't tell her that. I just opened the door and said, "Come in," before the fundraiser, before the documents, before the transfer buttons and quiet revenge. I believed I had it all, and I wasn't just pretending. I really believed it. Our mornings started the same way. French press coffee, light classical music drifting from the Bluetooth speaker, Dan reading the business section, me planning out my Pilates schedule and grocery list. It was peaceful, familiar, predictable. He liked that about me. Or so he said. "You keep me grounded, Mary." That's what he told people at dinner parties, right after he kissed my cheek and called me his better half. I wore it like a badge, not realizing I was wearing a leash too. We'd built a life, married 9 years, no kids, by choice. We said we were the fun couple, the ones who could pack up and fly to Cabo on a Tuesday. We had the house in Highland Park with white shutters and a pool shaped like a violin. We had the investment properties, the charity galas, the luxury SUVs we barely drove ourselves. And we had her, Sabrina, my best friend since college, the maid of honor at our wedding, the godmother to our golden retriever, Toby. She lived 2 blocks over, and half the time, we were in each other's houses more than our own. Sabrina was the type of woman who turned heads without trying, not the loud kind of beautiful, no red lips or plunging necklines. She had a quiet magnetism, perfect skin, effortless clothes, that kind of laughter that made people want to be near her. And she knew it. She always said she envied my life. "You and Dan are so solid," she'd sigh, swirling wine on our patio. "I can't even get a guy to text me back, and you've got a man who brings you fresh orchids every Friday." I used to laugh and say, "Well, marry him then." I didn't know I was handing her the blueprint. Dan and Sabrina got along too well, but I told myself it was innocent. She was like a sister to me, and he was my husband. What kind of woman suspects her best friend of trying to take what's hers? But now, looking back, the signs weren't just there. They were neon. Like the time I came back early from my spa weekend, and they were having coffee together in our kitchen. Or the way they exchanged glances during game night when I said something embarrassing. Or the time she showed up to my birthday dinner wearing the same dress Dan had once complimented on a stranger, a specific shade of emerald green I'd never seen her wear before. It's strange how betrayal rarely announces itself with a bang. It seeps in through the cracks you didn't know were there. I remember one night we were out on the patio, just the 3 of us. Dan had grilled steaks. Sabrina brought over her signature sangria. And I watched them laugh together under the string lights I had picked out. They looked like a couple. I looked like the third wheel at my own marriage. Still, I said nothing. Because I believed in loyalty. I believed in boundaries. I believed in them. Dan was charming. That was his superpower. He could make you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when you were surrounded by people smarter, richer, more beautiful. He knew exactly when to reach for your hand, exactly when to compliment your new haircut, exactly how to apologize when he forgot something important. He'd say things like, "I know I mess up, but you're the only one who really sees me." Or, "I'd be nothing without you, Mary. You know that, right?" And I did know, because I had built the foundation. I had managed the taxes, the contracts, the real estate details while he played the charming frontman. He was the dream, and I was the structure that made the dream possible. I used to think that made us equal, that my value was recognized even if it wasn't flashy. But slowly, Dan stopped asking. He'd take business meetings without telling me. He'd joke about how I didn't need to worry about the heavy stuff. I thought it was affection. It was dismissal. And Sabrina, she always had a way of inserting herself. "Let me help with the party planning. Mind if I come along to the open house? Dan said you were overwhelmed. I can take something off your plate." It was subtle. But every time she inserted herself, something of mine went missing. My control, my space, my husband. There was one night I'll never forget. It was pouring rain in Dallas, one of those wild storms where the sky turns green and the air goes still right before the thunder rolls in. Dan wasn't home. He said he had a networking dinner downtown. So I curled up on the couch with tea and started flipping through our old wedding album. I found a photo of Sabrina fastening the clasp on my necklace before the ceremony. She was looking at me, smiling. But her hand? It wasn't on my necklace. It was resting lightly against my bare back. And I remember, just then, wondering, had it always looked that intimate? Or was I only seeing it clearly now? Even Toby, our dog, started acting strange. He'd bark when Sabrina came over. He used to love her. Now he growled and backed away, tail low, ears down. I joked about it at first, but dogs always know. I began noticing things, like how Dan changed his cologne without mentioning it, how his shirts were ironed differently, the collars sharper, how Sabrina once complimented his new scent before I even noticed it. It chipped away at me, day by day. I tried to rationalize it. They're just close. You're being paranoid. Don't ruin a 20-year friendship over suspicion. But the truth was already moving beneath the surface, and I had no idea that by the end of that year, I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, transferring every last asset into my name. I used to believe trust was something you earned once and then carried with you forever. That once someone proved their loyalty, you could tuck them into your heart and never have to check again. That love and friendship, once proven, were unshakable. I don't believe that anymore. Trust isn't a finish line. It's a bank account. And the moment you stop paying into it, it starts going broke. Dan and Sabrina had stopped depositing. But I kept overdrafting my heart, hoping the fees wouldn't catch up. They did. And by the time I realized it, they weren't just sleeping together. They were planning a life that didn't include me. But what they didn't know was that I had already started planning too. The truth didn't explode. It didn't slap me across the face or crash through the door. It seeped in, slow, silent, devastating. It was a Tuesday. One of those ordinary days that should have meant nothing. I'd been to the grocery store, taken Toby to the groomer, and was about to start dinner when my phone buzzed. A message from Sabrina. "Hey babe, just checking. Did you mean to leave your navy blazer in Dan's car? He was heading to the dry cleaner and wasn't sure if it was yours. Also, dinner Thursday still on?" Navy blazer, Dan's car, dry cleaner. I hadn't worn that blazer in months, and I hadn't been in Dan's car in weeks. My stomach dropped. Not because I didn't know, but because now she knew I knew, and she was still lying. That message wasn't a mistake. It was a test. A subtle warning. "I'm closer than you think. I'm inside now. How are you going to play it?" I didn't reply. Instead, I walked straight to Dan's office downstairs, pulled open his desk drawer, and found it. The hotel key card. The generic "thank you for staying with us" envelope. The receipt with one king bed, 2 guests, and a room service charge for champagne and chocolate mousse. I just stood there, holding it. My first instinct was to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because I'd been preparing for this moment, and still, it felt like being struck. Like my brain couldn't compute the betrayal I'd already predicted. I sank to the floor, clutching the keycard, knees pressed against my chest, and let out the kind of sob that only happens when something in you splits. I stayed there for hours. The floor felt cold, but real, like something I could hold on to while everything else fell apart. I kept whispering the same question over and over, like it would offer a different answer each time. How could they? Dan came home around 10 p.m., hair slightly damp. A faint whiff of that new cologne, not the one I bought him. He looked at me, sitting in the dark at the edge of the bed, and his face changed. "Mary, what's wrong?" I held up the keycard. Didn't say a word. Silence stretched between us like an exposed nerve. He blinked, swallowed. And then, the audacity, he sighed, like he was the one in pain. "Let me explain." That was the moment I realized. He wasn't sorry he did it. He was sorry I found out. I didn't scream, didn't cry again. I just stared at him, stone cold, and said, "How long?" He hesitated. Too long. Long enough for me to know this wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a slip. Finally, he said it. A little over a year. A year. 365 days. Of lies. Of her sitting across from me at dinner, pretending. Of him making love to me while carrying another woman's scent on his skin. It wasn't just betrayal. It was duplication. A copy-paste version of our life being played out. Without me. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he mumbled, as if that made it better. "I didn't plan it. It just got complicated." I laughed then. The kind of laugh that breaks the air. "Complicated? You mean you accidentally fell into my best friend for 12 months? His face twisted. "Mary, please." But I was already gone. Not physically, emotionally. Something in me turned off. That night I packed a small bag, just enough to get through a few days, and drove to my sister's place in Fort Worth. I didn't sleep, didn't eat. Just lay on her guest bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that now meant something else. The anniversary trip Sabrina planned? A cover. The surprise dinners Dan made me? Guilt? The slow withdrawal from our intimacy? Not aging. Not stress. Infidelity. I spiraled. Hard. I went through photos, deleted text threads, scrolled back through old messages from both of them, looking for signs I had missed. And I found them. Dozens of them. Tiny betrayals wrapped in compliments. Jokes that weren't funny. Words that stung a little too much in hindsight. I felt stupid. Not just for loving them, but for trusting my own perception. How could I have been so blind? And then came the shame. The shame of being the woman who got cheated on. The one who didn't see it coming. Or worse, the one who did and let it happen anyway. I stopped answering calls, stopped showering, watched mindless reality TV for hours just to avoid hearing my own thoughts. But the worst part? The guilt. Not for them, but for myself. Because part of me still wanted to call him, still wanted him to beg, still wanted her to apologize, crying, swearing it was a mistake. That part of me was the weakest and the most honest, the part that whispered, "Maybe if you had been more attentive, maybe if you hadn't been so busy with the business, maybe you weren't enough." I didn't recognize myself anymore. This wasn't the Mary who hosted perfect dinner parties, the Mary who organized charity drives and read 5 books a month. This was someone else, someone wrecked. And yet, beneath all that pain, beneath the humiliation and heartbreak and confusion, was something else. A flicker, a spark, a question. What now? Because the truth had landed. The collapse had come, and I was still breathing, barely, but still. And that meant something. I looked in the mirror 2 weeks later, hair matted, eyes puffy, lips cracked from dehydration. And I saw someone who had nothing left to lose. That's when it started. The quiet shift, the internal rebellion. I began writing everything down. Dates, lies, gaps in their stories. I created a timeline of betrayal, not for revenge, not yet, but for clarity. The more I wrote, the more the fog lifted. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I had been targeted by the two people I loved most. They didn't just betray me. They rewrote my life without my consent. And so I picked up a pen and started rewriting it back. But I wasn't ready to act yet. Not until I understood just how deep the damage went. Not until I knew what else they'd taken, and what they hadn't noticed I still had. People think heartbreak is loud, that it explodes and bleeds and begs for attention. But mine went silent, like someone turned the volume down on my life and forgot to turn it back up. I floated, woke up in a stranger's guest room every morning, even though it was my sister's house. I smiled when she brought me tea, nodded when she asked if I was okay. I wasn't, but I didn't have the words for what I was. I tried to move on the way people said I should. I downloaded dating apps, went on walks, bought a new journal, burned sage in the bathroom, even tried hot yoga. Everyone said sweat and mantras would bring peace. They didn't. They just made me dizzy and sore. The therapist I saw twice a week was kind. Too kind. She kept asking how I felt. I wanted to scream, "I don't know how I feel. That's the problem." But instead, I said things like, "I guess I'm just tired and some days are better." They weren't. I lied because I didn't want to scare her, because I was already scared of myself. I lost weight without trying. People complimented me, said I looked strong. They didn't know I was skipping meals because I couldn't eat without crying. Everywhere I went, I saw ghosts. The coffee shop where Dan used to write notes on my napkins. The boutique Sabrina and I once spent hours in, trying on sunglasses we couldn't afford. Even the parking garage made me flinch. Same level, same spot, same routine I used to follow like scripture. Now it felt like a crime scene. My friends reached out, texted, called, but I couldn't stand the questions, the pity, the offers to help. I started turning off my phone for days at a time, slept till noon, watched old movies on mute because the dialogue hurt. Everything reminded me of a version of myself that no longer existed. I hit rock bottom on a Sunday morning. I was still wearing the same t-shirt from Friday. Hadn't brushed my hair in 2 days. I went to pour cereal and realized I had no milk. And I just stood there, staring at the empty carton in the fridge like it had betrayed me too. That's when I collapsed. Right there, on the tile floor, knees bent, arms wrapped around my chest like I could hold myself together if I just squeezed tight enough. I thought, if I disappeared right now, who would even notice? And then, like a cruel punchline, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Dan. "Hope you're doing okay. I'm happy to meet and talk if you want. No pressure." No pressure. Just pressure. I didn't reply. I couldn't. But something shifted. Because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't crying over what I lost. I was furious at what he assumed I'd want to get back. That night, I sat in bed and reread every therapy worksheet I'd ignored. One question stuck out. What are you avoiding by staying in pain? The answer was obvious. Responsibility, power, rebuilding. If I stayed broken, no one would expect anything from me. But if I stood up, I'd have to choose what to do next. I'd have to become someone new. And I didn't know who that was yet. That's when I met Vanessa. She wasn't a therapist. Not officially. She taught a women's workshop on financial clarity and identity reinvention at a co-working space my sister dragged me to. I didn't want to go, but I owed her. And the promise of free wine didn't hurt. Vanessa was in her early 50s, wore chunky jewelry and bold lipstick like it was armor. She spoke with the kind of confidence that felt contagious. Like if you sat near her long enough, you'd start believing in yourself again. At the end of the workshop, she said something I'll never forget. When women get betrayed, they think they lost everything. But here's the truth. You already survived the worst part. Now, it's just paperwork and power moves. I don't know why, but that line snapped something back into place. After the session, I waited until the room emptied and approached her. I told her, haltingly, that I wasn't okay. That I didn't know how to be angry without losing control. That I didn't know how to forgive myself for staying blind. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't have to forgive yourself for trusting. Trusting is not a flaw. It's what makes you human. But now you get to learn something even better: how to trust yourself." She offered to mentor me, not in some official weekly meeting kind of way, but with quiet check-ins, tough love, and a stack of books and resources that would shape the next version of me. And so, slowly, I started rebuilding. I got a job, part-time, at a local interior design firm. Nothing glamorous, but it got me out of bed. I started journaling daily. Not about Dan, not about Sabrina. About me. What I liked. What I hated. What made me feel alive. I cut off more people than I expected. Not just Dan. Not just Sabrina. But mutual friends who didn't want to take sides. Even one of my aunts who suggested I take him back. Men wander sometimes. It hurt. But I realized something powerful. Peace costs something, and I was ready to pay. Then came the twist, the false hope. The night I thought maybe, just maybe, I was past it. It was a Friday. I felt good. Got a fresh haircut, bought a new blazer, went out for dinner with coworkers and laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. And then I saw them, across the restaurant, Dan and Sabrina. She was in my dress, the navy silk one I'd worn to his company's gala the year before, her hand on his arm, his fingers tracing slow circles on her wrist, the way he used to calm me down when I was anxious. They didn't see me, but I saw enough. The laughter died in my throat. The confidence? Gone in a heartbeat. I excused myself, locked myself in the restroom, and just shook. Not because I still wanted him, but because I realized how easy it was to fall backward. Healing isn't linear. It's a spiral. And sometimes you hit the same hurt again, just in a deeper layer. But this time, I didn't spiral for days. I let myself grieve. Then I wiped my tears, stood tall in that mirror, and said out loud, "You are not what they did to you." That night, I didn't drink, didn't call anyone. I went home, opened my laptop, and started the spreadsheet I'd been avoiding. Asset review, legal entitlements, hidden accounts, shared business interests. I was ready, not for a fight, for a takeover. Because if Dan and Sabrina wanted to play house with what I built, they were about to learn exactly whose name was still on the deed. I didn't change overnight. No one ever does. The glow-up people talk about online? It's rarely loud. It's a whisper at first, a quiet return to yourself. For me, it started with breath. Vanessa taught me how to sit still without escaping. That was harder than it sounds. For months, every moment of silence had been filled with overthinking, overanalyzing, or overcompensating. But learning to just be, not perfect, not productive, not pitied, was the first real act of power I reclaimed. Mornings became sacred. I'd wake before the sun, light a single candle, and sip coffee in silence. No phone, no news, just me, and a feeling I hadn't let myself hold in months: presence. The job at the design firm became more than a paycheck. It became a seed. One day, while sketching layouts for a mid-century remodel, the client asked, "Why aren't you doing this on your own?" I laughed it off, but the idea stuck. So I started freelancing at night, helping single women redesign their homes post-divorce, not just decorating, transforming spaces that once held pain into sanctuaries of power. I called the business Second Light. It wasn't about the first spark. It was about what comes after, when you rise from ash and build something that burns cleaner, stronger, and only for you. The first few clients were cautious. So was I. But word spread. And within 6 months, I had a wait list of women who didn't want a new sofa. They wanted a new self. I still had my scars. Still caught myself wondering what they were doing sometimes. But more and more, it mattered less. Because I was building something of my own now. Not a life wrapped around someone else. Not a marriage maintained like a museum exhibit. Something raw. Real. Mine. I dyed my hair darker. Not to hide, but to reflect the woman I'd become. I started boxing lessons on Saturdays. Replaced wine with lemon water. Replaced old playlists with Silence or Nina Simone. I stopped explaining myself. I didn't date. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I wasn't looking. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't need to be someone. I was enough company for myself. And God, it felt good. One evening, I ran into an old acquaintance at a gallery opening. His name was Jordan. He owned a framing studio down in Bishop Arts and used to be part of the same charity board Dan and I sat on. I barely recognized him. Beard thicker, energy softer. We talked for a while. About art, healing, starting over. He didn't mention Dan. Didn't ask about the past. He just looked at me. Really looked. Like I was whole. Not broken, not impressive. Just seen. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. Not a date, just coffee. And for the first time I said yes, without guilt. Not because I needed closure or distraction, but because something inside me whispered, "You're allowed to want joy again." We met up the following week, talked for hours, laughed a little too loudly. It didn't turn romantic. Not then, but something about it felt like a promise. That life could be warm again. Therapy became less about survival and more about growth. I stopped asking, "What did I do wrong?" and started asking, "What do I want next?" I moved into a small loft downtown. All exposed brick and wide windows. No ghosts in the corners. Just light. Just me. Vanessa surprised me with a framed quote for my office. "You don't get your old life back. You get something better. Your own damn self." I hung it right above my desk. By month 9, I'd restructured nearly all our shared assets. Thanks to the documents I signed during those first few silent months of grief, my name was now on every property. The house, the lake cabin, the real estate portfolio. Dan had signed off on the paperwork under the guise of estate simplification. He didn't read the fine print. And the best part? It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. He could keep his image, his lies, his secondhand love. I had the rest. And then, the invitation arrived. It was a white envelope with gold trim. Embossed, classy, expensive. No return address, but I knew the handwriting immediately. Sabrina's. "You are cordially invited to the Danvers Foundation Gala, celebrating Dan and Sabrina's 1-year partnership and philanthropic expansion." A gala. A public appearance. Their big debut. I let the invitation sit on my counter for 3 days. Didn't touch it. Didn't think about going. And then, on a quiet Wednesday, I found myself standing in front of my closet, running my fingers across a black velvet gown I hadn't worn since Dan's last promotion party. I tried it on. It still fit. Only now, it looked different. I looked different. Not fragile, not heartbroken, but untouchable. I didn't RSVP, didn't call anyone. But deep down, I knew. The confrontation was coming. Not in a blaze, not in a tantrum, in something far more dangerous. Stillness. I didn't plan to go. Not really. But sometimes, life writes its own punctuation, and I wanted to be the final period at the end of their sentence. The night of the gala, Dallas shimmered in gold. One of those early summer evenings where the air hangs heavy with perfume and money. Luxury cars lined the valet. Women glided through the grand entrance like silk on marble. And I stood across the street, watching. I wasn't nervous, just aware. Aware of the beat of my heart. Aware of the weight of my heels. aware that the woman inside this body wasn't the same one who used to decorate these events and greet everyone with wine and wide eyes. She was gone. In her place was someone sharper, quieter, untouchable. The doorman recognized me and smiled politely. "Mrs. Bloomington." He nodded. I returned a smile so soft it could cut glass. "Not anymore." Inside, the ballroom sparkled. Chandeliers like frozen fireworks. A jazz quartet humming low in the corner. Laughter bubbled across champagne glasses. People mingled, flattered, lied in beautiful shoes. I moved slowly, deliberately. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't announcing myself either. Let them feel me before they saw me. I passed the auction tables, glanced at the floral displays, all curated to Sabrina's taste, expensive, overdone, missing warmth. Then I saw them. Dan in a navy tux, hair slicked back, a little more silver at the temples. Sabrina in a crimson dress, daring, elegant, almost regal. They stood near the stage, accepting compliments from donors, laughing like they'd earned the moment. They looked like a power couple, the kind that graces magazine covers, until you get close enough to see the cracks. I waited, let them feel the temperature shift before their eyes caught mine. It was Sabrina who noticed first. She froze mid-sentence. A smile stuck to her face like a mask that suddenly didn't fit. Dan turned. And in that split second, he paled, like he'd seen a ghost. Or worse, a mirror. I didn't blink, didn't smirk. I just met his eyes and held them like a verdict. He started toward me, awkward, out of rhythm, unsure of his footing for the first time in years. "Mary," he said, breath-catching. I tilted my head slightly. Dan. His name fell from my lips like a period, not a memory, not a plea, just closure. Sabrina followed him, more hesitant. Her eyes scanning my dress, my jewelry, my poise, trying to understand how I didn't look broken. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. Just enough. "I didn't come to talk," I said, voice low, "just to return what was never yours." Dan blinked. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single envelope. White, plain, heavy. I handed it to him. His hand shook slightly. "What is this?" he asked. "Deeds," I replied, "to everything I didn't want." He opened it, brows furrowed. His eyes moved across lines of fine print, and then widened. The house, the lake cabin, the business shares, signed, transferred, all his again. Except, Why would you give this back?" he stammered. I smiled softly, because keeping it would have meant I still needed to prove something to you. Sabrina stepped forward, voice brittle. "So, what, you're just here to gloat?" I looked at her then, really looked. She wore the life I used to think I wanted. The man, the status, the room, but none of it fit her. The dress clung to her like desperation. The laughter around her had stopped. She was standing in a spotlight meant for someone else, and the glow wasn't flattering anymore. "You're not wearing it well," I said simply. Her cheeks flushed. Whether from shame or rage, I couldn't tell. But she looked at me like I was the ending she hadn't planned for, like my presence disrupted the fantasy she'd tried so hard to choreograph. Dan looked like he wanted to say something, to apologize, explain, salvage, but he couldn't find the words. So I gave him one. Just one. "I mourned you," I said. "Both of you." I let that hang, felt the silence tighten around their throats. "Not just what you did, but what you could have been." Dan's eyes flickered. The mirror was up now, and he saw it, saw the woman he once had, the future he threw away for convenience, the legacy he traded for cheap passion and weaker hands. I turned to leave. No drama, no scene, just a clean, graceful exit. But before I stepped away, I leaned in, just close enough for him to hear. And I said the line that would follow them for years. "She may be holding your hand now, Dan, but I still hold your future." Then I walked out. Not a single person tried to stop me. The air outside was cooler. The music dulled as the door closed behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because power isn't loud. It's not revenge. It's not taking everything they love. It's knowing you could've, and choosing not to. I never told anyone exactly what happened that night. Not my sister, not Vanessa, not even Jordan. The gala came and went like any other event in Dallas. There were photos online, smiling faces, champagne flutes. Sabrina wore red. Dan gave a speech. The world clapped like nothing cracked beneath the surface. But I knew, and so did they. Sometimes, knowing is enough. A few weeks later, I sat on the balcony of my new place, barefoot, tea in hand, Toby curled at my feet, watching the sun fold itself over the skyline like soft linen. The city buzzed below, but up here, everything felt still. Stillness used to scare me. Now, it feels like a room I get to decorate. I lit a candle and opened the drawer of my writing desk. Inside was a stack of letters. None of them mailed. Some were folded neatly. Others crumpled, rewritten, scratched out, rewritten again. The first one I wrote weeks after I found out, to Sabrina. It was sharp, raw, blistering. I told her everything I wanted her to feel: guilt, shame, regret. I accused her of using my love like currency, of knowing better and doing worse. I never sent it. The second one was for Dan, not the man he became, but the man I married. I thanked him, not out of sarcasm, but because he taught me something I never would have learned on my own: that losing everything can sometimes be the only way to find yourself. That love without respect is just performance, and that silence can say what screaming never could. I burned that one, watched the words curl and lift into ash. There was something freeing about that, like burying a version of myself I no longer needed. These days, I keep a different kind of letter tucked in my wallet, one I wrote to the woman I was before it all. The one who smiled too quickly, forgave too easily, and bent herself into shapes to keep everyone else comfortable. I tell her she was worthy, even before the glow-up, even before the exit, even when she was on the floor of the kitchen with nothing but an empty milk carton and a broken heart. Sometimes I read it when I forget. Second Light took off faster than I expected. Word of mouth, referrals, a feature in a local lifestyle magazine. Turns out there are a lot of women rebuilding from ruins. Turns out they don't need a savior, just someone who's been there and isn't afraid to tell the truth. I started hosting small gatherings, coffee circles, workshops. Not therapy, just space. Women came with their stories, their divorces, their fresh wounds and quiet victories. They laughed, cried, exchanged keys to storage units and playlists for letting go. We built something honest, unpolished, powerful. One morning, a woman named Celia stayed after everyone left. She was quiet, reserved, mid-40s with eyes that carried too much. She looked at me and said, "You don't seem angry anymore. How did you let it go?" I thought about it, about how long I clung to the anger like it was armor, how it made me feel safe when everything else fell apart. "I didn't let it go," I told her. "I let it burn out. Then I swept up the ashes and started building something softer." She nodded. Didn't say much after that. But I saw something shift in her eyes, a flicker I recognized. That's how healing works. You pass it like a candle, one hand to the next. As for Jordan, we kept having coffee. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people meeting each other exactly where they were. Sometimes we'd sit in the park and talk about art and grief and favorite songs. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. One afternoon he brought me a book of poetry. Inside was a note. "Not everything has to be permanent to be beautiful. Let it unfold." He didn't need to fix me. He just made space. And that, I've learned, is love in its most honest form. We're not together in any official sense. But there's something steady in the way he holds my gaze. Like he isn't waiting for me to be anything other than exactly what I am. Some days, I still think about Dan and Sabrina. Not with rage, not even with sadness. Just curiosity. I wonder if the silence between them is heavier now. If she ever wakes up wondering if this version of him is worth what she lost. If he ever looks at the empire I built and realizes he mistook the architect for the blueprint. But that's not my story anymore. It never really was. The last piece I let go of was the lake cabin. I drove there one weekend, alone. Brought a box of old photographs, a bottle of wine, and the key I never gave back. I walked through each room, touched the walls, let the memories play out like home videos. And then, I took one last photo, not of the cabin, but of myself, standing in the driveway, smiling, whole. Then I locked the door, left the key on the porch, and drove away with the windows down. I didn't cry. I played Otis Redding and let the wind tangle my hair. I sang along, badly, loudly, free. Because sometimes closure doesn't look like a clean ending. Sometimes it's a quiet drive home, a song that hits just right, a Sunday morning where nothing hurts and you don't even realize it until halfway through your coffee. That's where I live now. In the peace I built myself, in the life I didn't expect, but desperately needed. Not as someone's wife, not as anyone's fool, just as Mary. And finally, that's more than enough.